When you're going to look at gross yardage, you're going to sit there and say, hey, Lamar Jackson played well last night. He's not the reason that they lost. Okay? Because he had over 300 yards of total offense, right? That's what people are going by. And he did well on third down. And so there's a lot to it to where you can sit here and try and tell me that Lamar Jackson is better than the perception of how he's playing, or he's not the biggest part of the problem in Baltimore, who suddenly has gone from a team who last year had the best record in football to this year seems imminently and completely beatable, even if most of the pieces are the same and some of them improved. Granted, Ronnie Stanley being out, we told you that would be a major, major inhibitor for the Baltimore Ravens heading forward. We're not saying that Lamar Jackson was terrible last night. We're not saying that. And I'm not sitting here telling you that Lamar Jackson is a bad quarterback. But you look at, and I don't want to overreact to Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals getting a win. That was an amazing catch that was made by Nuke Hopkins. Amazing, amazing catch. Like one of the 10 best catches in the history of the National Football League. Not just because it was a Hail Mary, but because there's literally two guys, one in front of him, one behind him. You kind of can't play defense any better. And he just had 2-inch longer fingers and better hands than the defensive players. That's why they play defense, Gottlieb. So I don't want to overreact because the Arizona Cardinals were dead and beaten in that game. But the simple dynamic of a guy who's an accurate thrower who can pick apart a defense with his arm, first and foremost, and then with his legs, secondarily, as opposed to Lamar Jackson, who can pick you apart with his legs, first and foremost, and his arm, secondarily. I think if you can't see the difference in that dynamic, I can't really help you. I think that I've heard people saying the Ravens defense isn't the same as it was last year, and they're probably right. Their offense, also trading away one of their tight ends, they had that 3 tight end packages last year, also isn't the same. Their running game has changed, and some of the personnel has changed over the past 2 years that he's been the starting quarterback. That's fine. But the point is, that the signs of a great quarterback are the ability to overcome when things aren't perfect, as opposed to what Lamar seems to have become is a really, really good quarterback, maybe even great quarterback when everything is right. What can you do when things go wrong? What can you do when your defense isn't as good? What can you do? What can you do when you lose your left tackle? You know? I mean, again, the example of the difference in a Pat Mahomes. Right? Like, let's not forget that Pat Mahomes, his first full year as a starter, he was the MVP of the league, and they're an offsides call from going to the Super Bowl, and his defense was trash. Then you give him a decent defense, he wins the Super Bowl. Right? So the idea is that everything doesn't have to be perfect for Pat Mahomes, and he can still make plays and carry you. That's not the case with Lamar. You have to be dynamic and you have to be balanced. I'm not saying running the football isn't important, but the primary thing you have to be able to do is pick apart a defense with your arm. And even late in the game, when they're spreading it out and they're throwing, and I will grant you, the weather was terrible. It was terrible for both teams. And by the way, Tom Brady has been great when the weather's been terrible in New England for years. It's one of the things that Aaron Rodgers does not get enough credit for. He's been great all these years, just like Tom Brady, playing in horrific, freezing cold, windy weather. It's the big question for Joe Burrow, who seems to check every box. Arm strength is a question, and that gets called into question when you play in these terrible outside conditions, which people go, football weather. But I want you to understand that this is not me telling you Lamar stinks, or it's a little bit of me saying I told you so, but it's because this was the analysis of Lamar Jackson, the quarterback. Could he evolve into a true NFL pocket passer who can also run for a first down or extend the play in the pocket? And to this point, with 2 full seasons, that's really because we're right about 2 full seasons as a starting quarterback in the NFL, with 2 playoff games under his belt, with a very good offensive line and good enough skill position players, the answer is no. Okay, this has been the question about Cam Newton. And Cam Newton, when everything was right in Carolina, they had a great running game, awesome offensive line, spectacular defense, and, we'll be fair, they played a really bad schedule. That year, they played one team in the regular season that finished with an above 500 record. When everything is right, Cam Newton was awesome. He was an MVP. But what can you do when things go wrong? Now, look, you're playing against Belichick, and you can sit here and tell me that Belichick can scheme it up, and he can. But that's the same Belichick defense which gave up 27 points to the Jets last week. That's the same Belichick defense that had 8 guys opt out. And it wasn't just that some of the throws, they weren't inaccurate. They were just thrown to guys that weren't open because he misread a defense. The juxtaposition of Kyler versus Lamar is fascinating because they're both explosive athletes. They both have explosive arms. But one seems to have a better ability to not only pick apart a defense with his mind, but also with his arm. Lamar seems to be getting better in terms of knowing where he wants to go with the football, but the ball is not going exactly where he wants it to go. And the offense, whether it hasn't evolved because of the coordinator or because of the coordinator's understanding of who Lamar is, seems to have a ceiling. Don't get me wrong, running the football is important, and Lamar is the best running quarterback we've seen, probably even counting Steve Young. He's the best. I can't imagine trying to tackle him. But if you don't think there's something missing there in terms of a true NFL quarterback, you're not really paying attention. There's a reason that I know injuries derailed his career with RG3. But RG3 kind of took the league by storm with the Skins, and that was when Kyle Shanahan was his offensive coordinator, and they basically ran Baylor's offense in the NFL. And then they wanted him to evolve, and he just couldn't. The Ravens haven't really asked Lamar to evolve, and I think the reason is they just don't think he can. So you get the most out of what you got, you put him in the best situation to succeed, and you have to know that the ceiling does in fact exist. And apparently, if everything else isn't working smoothly, that ceiling is probably lower than people thought.